Well, it is now 10:30 on a Thursday. That means it's time for Brainstorming the Human Connection, brought to you by the South Dakota Humanities Council. My name is Lawrence Diggs. I'm joined by my, I say, running partner, Colby Christensen, who's over at the South Dakota Humanities Council. And I always forget to mention Colby is the man behind the curtain. He's the man behind the scene. He does so much to make this program happen, including and especially contacting some of the great guests that we have on this picture. He doesn't get enough credit for that. We're going to have a conversation today, as usual. This program is really about conversation, and it's really about giving you a chance to ask questions and really be interactive, as opposed to being just a passive voice in the conversation. We want you to take this opportunity to ask questions, ask the deeper questions, ask things that may not be complete when we're presenting things, and it's easy to do. When you know a subject well, you can just take it for granted. People know things that they don't, because they may seem so fundamental and simple, but it's not in our DNA to know a lot of things that we're just not introduced to. So when you see or hear something that you have questions about, this is a place where you can ask. In fact, that's all you can really get out of this program is what you put in, and putting in something means being interactive with it. So we hope that you'll join us, and feel free. There's no stupid questions. There are unanswered questions, but the only stupid question is the one that wasn't asked and you needed to know, I suppose. One of the things that we humans have a hard time with is change, and I think it's partly because, we only have, no matter how smart we are, we only have so much processing power. And we tend to group things and make, let's say, assumptions about things, or we want to think many things are static so that we can move around, so that we can calculate things. But if things are always moving around and changing, it can be really hard to process all that data, and especially when everything is moving. The problem is everything is always moving. And we can pretend that it's not. We can pretend that it's static, like we can be upset because our friend of 50 years aren't the same way as we remembered them when they were teenagers. And we expect that people almost don't change as they're growing up. In fact, we don't want them to change, because that keeps them, we can understand them. We want them to have the same personality. We also want things to be the same. You notice how many, at least I notice, how many people lament that things aren't the way they used to be. Nothing is ever going to be the way it used to be. Though the French would say the more things change, the more they remain the same. But we're really kind of in flux, all the time. And I mention all of this because today we're going to be talking about change. And we're going to be talking about change relative to native populations in particular. But those changes aren't so different than the changes that we go through. When we look at other people outside of ourselves, and we're focusing on what they're doing as though it's disconnected from us. But really, it's not so much different than the struggles and the reasons that we go through change. And so today, my guests are Keli brings three white horses, and she's the director and curator of the at the Shinte Gleska University, and that is over in Antelope Lake, right? Is it in
Yeah,
Antelope Lake? Okay,
Antelope
great.
Lake campus.
Right, the Antelope Lake campus at the university.
Yes.
And we're going to be talking mostly about the transition that Native people, particular tribes, are going through in this conversation. But I want you to think about it not just in terms of what was happening to them and what is still happening to them, but what's happening to us, you know. And I think you'll start to relate to how much their story is our story. We also have with us Ned Day, and Ned and I go way back a couple of weeks, where I was out at mission and doing some work with and he was gracious enough to uh, host our prison art show. And we'll talk a little bit about his project out there because I think that's also part of this transition period, and transitions in general, things that are new, things that are happening now because something happened before, and there are always pressures on things to change. I'll start with you, Keli. Can you give us the 50,000-foot view of who Keli is?
Um, so I'm Keli Brings Three White Horses. I am, like you said, the director and curator at the Sioux Heritage Center. We also house the Lakota Archives and Historical Research Center. We're with Sinte Glushka University, and we are located on the Antelope Lake campus. And I have been here in this, like in the Sioux Heritage Center for 25 years. I started off as registrar, and it just sort of developed over the years. I'm also a
How
graduate.
do you get a job like that when you're 5 years old?
I know. I started when I was 4. But my degree came from actually Ned's program, the Great Plains Art Institute, and that's where I studied. So my bachelor's is in art, and then I also studied education and museum and graduated from his program. But that was before he was there many moons ago.
Okay. Ned, can you give us a little bit of background about you and the kind of things you're doing?
Well, I'm the director of the Great Plains Art Institute, as you already mentioned. I've been the director for 2 years. I worked at the Art Institute for 11 years, working under Mackie McKeegan for the first 9. And so I teach classes. I'm a full-time instructor. So I teach 3D arts like sculpture, pottery, things like that. And then I also kind of manage the gallery, the art gallery, and just the day-to-day operations of the Art Institute.
Well, we're going to be talking about transition, and I'm going to go back to Keli now. And Keli, you are now putting in or have put in an exhibit that kind of focuses on different periods of change, particularly with the Lakota people, I understand.
Yes, it's the Klaus Jacobs and his wife Eva Anderson recently donated their exhibit, Rosebud Sioux, a Lakota people in transition. And what it is a series of John Anderson photos. And then they did the research to find descendants of John Anderson's photos. And so it crosses different time spans. So John Anderson was a photographer out here specifically for the Rosebud, around 1883, 1885, something like that, to the 1930s. And yeah, so that exhibit is now on display at Ned's facility.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about that exhibit?
works, I want to
Now
go
you,
blank.
yeah,
So, it's about 75 photographs, and it, like I said before, it starts with John Anderson's images, and there are also other photographers that involved. One of them was Bob Goff, who I knew. Oh, I can't remember the other. Maybe Ned might remember the other photographers, but there's a mix of older photos from John Anderson and newer photos that they took of descendants. And so it's an interesting contrast, or not contrast, but continuation. When, like, for example, one of the families is are full bulls. And then so they have images of the old full bull that John Anderson took. And then through research from Marcella Cash, who was our former director, our founding director of the Sioux Heritage Center, she helped with that research. And she found some of the descendants for Klaus in his research. And so then they began taking images of the descendants. And then in the exhibit, there's, you know, a continuation so that we can see that we're still here.
yeah. Ned, maybe you could fill in some of the particulars about what's in that exhibit.
Well, it's so Klaus wrote a book, and it happens to be the 20th anniversary of that book, published book. So that's part of it. So a lot of the photos are in there, and it kind of tells the story. So yeah, kind of like Kelly said, so there's all kinds of photos from the, you know, turn of the century, and just descendants of those original participants.
Maybe we could put up the photos and go through them, and that might be easier if we actually see them than trying to imagine them without seeing them. Colby, can you put up that first group? Which group was that, Kelly?
I didn't include any of the images from the exhibit.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that's what we're talking about.
Well, I think where the topic came from is the title of the exhibit is Lakota People in Transition. Mm-hmm. And that's where I guess we were discussing transitional periods and things that, you know, we even have a set of housing out here that was called transitional housing. Mm-hmm. A few of them still stand. And then like later when those got replaced, they put in Sioux 400s. And but there's been like an ongoing transition. And I think that our people have just always like rolled with the punches. We've always done our best to keep up and think progressively and stay ahead. And we have been through so much transition so quickly. Mm-hmm. And it's just interesting to look at that. And for some reason, a lot of our collections lately that we have been getting donated are from right around the 1930s. And that's kind of the tail end of John Anderson's images was in the 1930s. And but the 30s was really an incredible time of transition is what I'm learning. So like I'm a lifelong learner. And so I am still learning about a lot of this stuff myself so that I can help present our future exhibits using these objects. And so what I did bring was a few objects that I found interesting. Some images of objects that are in a collection we just recently received. Oh, okay. So this
tell us what are we looking at here?
Okay, so Leonard Whitlow was a donor about a year or two ago, and he brought a whole collection of objects where he said he met a lady or his mother met a lady at the beauty shop, and her husband had passed, and she was their last name was Brown, and her husband had this collection that she didn't want anymore. And Whitlow was very interested in our tribal culture, because they're from around the Portland area. So he was interested in their tribes out there. Anyway, he bought this collection up, and he had it all these years since the 1960s. But as his health failed, because he is now no longer with us at this point, it was really important for him to reach out to us and find these things their home. And so Brown was supposed to have had a store somewhere near St. Francis, and we're still working to research all of this. But in that collection, it looks like something somebody might have gathered at a store, because there's like a lot of little watch fobs, a lot of little pins, a lot of these bands. And what I thought was interesting, so the collection looks like it spans from like around the 1930s. And so the beadwork changed, or seems to reflect possibly those times. And it's like, it's not that I'm wondering, about these. And so all of a sudden you see the fleur-de-lis in our beadwork.
Right. So
And
what is
really,
what is this? What is this that we're looking at?
This piece of beadwork is actually like a band. It might be a belt, it might be a hat band. It has no backing to it. So at the ends of it are just little black ribbons. But I wanted to kind of get a close-up of it so that people could see the design on it. And so I just thought that was interesting, that are then. So this one, I actually did a little more research on this one. I almost went down a rabbit hole trying to understand this crossed oars symbology, because I thought, isn't that like associated with the Ivy League and their rowing teams and stuff like that? And I couldn't remember if it was somebody's, like if it was on like a logo or something. I'm not sure, but I thought that was really interesting. But anyway, when I was looking in the 30s, I found in 1936, a team from the University of Washington of working men had won an oaring competition, like a national, or might have been the Olympics. So I was wondering if that was in 1936. But anyway, it's probably a side note, trying to research that. And then this is also pretty common. And we do see this a lot. There's actually a book about the flag in Native American art. And I just thought it was interesting in this one where it says like USA and the flags like this. It's these are not our traditional designs. And so
what do you think caused these changes to these more updated or different designs? Or is it just this particular person? Like, was this a whole bunch of people who suddenly started doing this, or was it just this one person and then they were influenced by these more current themes?
Yeah, well, we don't really know who the artists were, because there's so many pieces in this collection. And with his history of probably being a shop owner, he probably purchased these from people that came in selling these. But what I just thought was interesting is how our traditional beadwork style sort of changed. And the next one's also flags, but that was also previous. Once we started seeing flags, we started using these. And there's older images I've seen before with flags in them, but I just think it's interesting. And so I think the next image is, so this is also like a popular thing that a lot of folks seem to know, is that we didn't waste things. And I think that was important in all of our transitions and all of our progress, that we didn't waste. And so this is actually a little pair of moccasins from the Whitlow collection that has the parfleche soles, where we recycled.
They had the what kind of sole?
Parfleche. So we recycled. Yes, we recycled our objects, the things that we used.
Mhm.
so that
What
we
is
didn't.
what is tar flesh?
Par flesh, I believe that's a French word, and it's kind of like our suitcases, you know, just what they were, sturdy rawhide, made in all kinds of different shapes, you know, depending on what you're using it for. And we would store our objects in them. And so the next image is basically, you know, the same, that's the same shoes, but you know, you can see the beadwork design and everything with them. But I
Well,
think
now
that
is this beadwork a more traditional kind of beadwork?
from what I understand, what I believe, yes. Yes, we did the more simple geometric. And I mean, I'm not a bead expert. I have friends that are, that can tell you, you know, where they've seen these, but I just also find, you know, the different beads that we've used over the years as they became available is also really interesting.
Mhm.
And then this was interesting because we suddenly started using numerals in our beadwork. You know, I don't know. I haven't, you know, seen a lot of like extensive collections to know if we had done this in the 20s or any other time sooner, you know, but I just thought that was an interesting example where we're bringing in, you know, another culture and things that into our culture.
Mhm. Well, what I find interesting is these are examples of different styles, but it raises a question of how these transitions happened, what, like what kind of things happened that made it interesting for at least one person, if not more, to start to experiment with a different design. And then how widespread was it? I mean, we know that this one single collection gives us lots of information, or lots of pieces, but is it like one school, or like uh, two or three people? At least I find that's the case in most cultural things. Is most of the people in that culture can't do those things. They can't do beadwork, and even if they can, they don't do beadwork. So what we're left with is usually a lot of, let's say, if you have 100 people, there may be 6 to 10 doing beads on some regular basis, and almost all the work is representative of their ideas. So I'm just wondering, how do you, as a curator, how do you think about those things? Or
Well,
what do you think about it?
I I guess well, from what I understand, traditionally we would we decorated our world around us, and everybody did it. And so, however, I think when you go through these transitional periods and stuff, so like, you know, for example, the elk tooth dresses. So the ladies or the children that would have extensive elk tooth dresses, that was a symbol of wealth because you only get 2 elk teeth per elk that's killed. And so, or I think it's just a continuation of that extension. And maybe at this point, the folks that could or get a hold of beads, you know, that they probably cost something, you had to trade, might be the ones that would be more likely to have the more elaborate beadwork, you know, or what was available to them at that time. Um, yeah, I just,
Sure. I know one person on this Zoom conference here has some experience in beads, and that's Betty, and she had her hand up. Betty, did you have a comment or
Thank you, Lawrence. I just want to throw in the fact that people doing this were artists. They were very creative, obviously, as we try to be nowadays. And also, I think my limited experience with friends, particularly Sisituan, Wapetuan, many people bead. it is not that exclusive as you suggested, and that's
Mm.
now. It's young women on, and children even are taking it up as they can. So I think, and I'm sure Kelly knows more about this than I do, but I'm not sure what this 1939 object is. But I think they beaded and decorated everyday objects because they had time and means to do that, especially certain times of the year, maybe, or I don't know. But this just looks like pure creativity to me. So that's about it. This is just so fun. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sharon, you had something you want to add? Go ahead. Turn your mic off. There you
So,
go.
how does someone bead? Do you put a little bead on a needle and then, go like this, or how is that done? Hello?
No, I'm waiting for an expert. Not an expert, but somebody who knows.
Somebody knows.
Well, essentially beadwork is, one bead at a time. There's all types of different beadwork depending on what you're doing. So like this bag that we're looking at is called lazy stitch. And so that's, you string a certain number of beads and then tack them back down until you cover the entire object. Whereas the previous items we were looking at, some of them were loom beading. And so that's a whole different process.
Oh.
Yeah,
There's a lot of different methods of beading.
Sure.
Oh.
Sure.
And so what's interesting about when you look at the like older objects like this is how they put it together.
Mm.
And so we also have some other pieces, and I just went to Minneapolis and picked up a piece, and I can't remember the name of the collection offhand, but there's only 2 pieces in it. And the bag that we received was a pipe bag, and the base of the pipe bag looked to be an older base. And then they had added on to it over the years. So then there was also like some fabric that was attached to a leather base, which looked almost like the smoking jackets, satins. And we plan on having that bag on display with a future exhibit here, but I didn't include that in these images. But I just think, I don't know, it's just, we're learning from looking at these pieces, and I'm sort of limited to what collections we have here at the university. But we've been, like I said, we've suddenly got this influx of objects that were from around the 1930s.
One of the things that I would like to let's say dig a little deeper in is these at least appear to be glass beads. I clearly can't touch them, but they look like glass beads. And before these glass beads, there were other things used and other approaches to beading. Clearly there was artwork that is what we would call beading before these glass beads. Do you have you or Ned or anyone else on the call has anybody been aware of how these things changed the artwork, for example? Like if you didn't have, making these little tiny beads is it's a technology kind of thing. Trying to do all those little beads one at a time by hand can be quite tricky, especially when you look at they're kind of rounded, when you look at them. So it's not something that you can make a lot of one by one. It usually requires some kind of machinery to do a whole bunch of them. So, but before that, people had different things that they used as beads. In other words, you might have a shell that you use, you might have a tooth that you might have a bark or I mean a twig that you put a hole in, horns, all kinds of things that could be cut and then made into beads. maybe not that tiny, but certainly small and beads. So does anybody have any insight as to, what kind of changes the artwork went through, or ways of making, this is a different style of beading, so you have to do it different than you would do other kind of breed. Anybody have any insight as to what other kind of changes went along with those?
Okay,
Well,
so,
oh,
go ahead, Ned.
Go ahead, Kelly.
No, I was just gonna say that our artistry changed as materials became available. And previously to beadwork, we often used quill work, and that came from porcupines, and we would use various dyes, and that's where our traditional, I believe, where our more traditional geometric patterns must have come from, because it's there's also quill work out there though that's floral in nature too. So yeah, as we moved around and materials became available, we adapted and we transitioned.
Ned, you were going to say something?
Oh, I was basically going to say what Kelly said, but there's also, if you go back to the parfleche, they use paint to paint those geometric designs as well, from different materials like ochre, just earthen materials.
So if I'm understanding you, Ned, people were painting the designs on, and then as they got beads that they could use to put those designs on, they did that. The other two other things I think about in terms of these small beads, in addition to their small size, is one, you have to have a hole, something to put in the hole, i.e. a needle of some kind that can go through the hole. And two, you would have to have some kind of thread that was small enough to go through a hole like that too. So I mentioned that because that requires a different kind of skill set. So that's like a change in the way that you create the art. At least it suggests to me that there are lots of changes happening. So that's the thing I wanted to explore, is like, what other things, even like counting, when you get to little beads like that, it's not like 5 or 10 where you have 5 or 10 fingers. Now in order to make these designs fit, there's not only counting but repetitive counting, so as to make the design, you have to count. So what other kinds of not to say people couldn't count at all, but you think about numbers in a different way when you're going to make a pattern. Much the same as painting with a brush is different than laying tile, for example. So,
Well, with the quill work, originally they would use sinew from animals, so the fascia and tendons that hold the muscles skeletal thing together. So the beads would have came from Italy. And with that as trade items, also the steel needles and thread. So they would have used like bone awls to work with the quill work, things like that. Bone awls, sinew, quills, and their natural dyes.
interesting.
Parfleche was
go ahead.
probably, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Parfleche was probably always painted because it's such a tough hide, you can't actually beat it. So all parfleches that I've seen are painted. And the origin of the paints would have changed over the years. One thing about, Lakota, Nakota, Dakota people is where we're industrious.
Mm.
We'll find something and we'll make something out of it. I've seen images, you know, I could have shared those, like when there's actually an image where there's a lady taken down in Valentine, Nebraska area, and she has a headdress made from peacock feathers.
Mm.
And that was right around that, like, I think it was right around the 1940s time period. And I thought that's interesting because she must have came into, you know, those feathers and then used them in a traditional way in a headdress. It's just interesting. I just think these time periods in images are fascinating. And some of the objects are interesting because you can just see how somebody must have came into this. Oh, another example is those little purses that were, there was carnival beads, and then there were these bags that were made like with tiles, and we actually have some breastplates made from different materials, like the old purses where they cut up and turned them into breastplates. So when our old materials started becoming more scarce, you know, like making the hair pipe bone necklaces and such, like, we would use what became available to recreate what we used traditionally. And as you know, the people became wealthier again, and we've been coming through this transition. We are returning back to trying to get the more traditional materials. And at this point, you know, when you think about what a hair pipe or bone beads would take to produce and cost, I mean, you go back around again to the folks that have the means to be able to pick those up would have the extensive regalia.
Mhm.
You know, it's just that the transition is really, really interesting, I think, how
Mhm.
we've always transitioned.
Mm. Did you have more pictures of different kind of art? I don't want to skip.
Oh, no, that was all the Whitlow collection that I thought was interesting from around the 30s. And then so this next collection was also during a similar time period, the from 36 to the 41, I believe these photos are taken. These are actually
Can you scroll those up for us? So
yeah, so these are the Ira Barkley collection. And this is housed at the South Dakota State Historical Society archives. And one of the first projects I did when I started with the Heritage Center, we went, and our goal was to collect as many images as we could find of ourselves. And so when we went to state, we worked with them and actually digitized everything that we could get our hands on that had to do with us. And the agreement was we could continue to use these for our educational purposes. And what I think is fascinating about the Ira Barkley collection is that somebody came out and took all kinds of images of us when we were transitioning into these more modern infrastructure. There you go. Infrastructure is probably the best word for this. So I think, what is the next image? I'm not exactly sure. Mine are kind of messed up. Oh, so I think this is interesting. This is from Bad Nation. They're working on a cottage and 1939. And you can see all these gentlemen have bibs on, or aprons that have a lumber yard like across the front of them. And this series of photos is like a time where we were moving from. So in these, you can see some of the older log type cabins, and then these folks came out and were building up the communities, trying to get a better infrastructure going. I think the next image is of one of the well rigs. So they came out and started digging wells for us as well. And in these series, there's, you know, the canning kitchens, different things that they were building for us, or we were working with them to improve our lifeways around here and to get updated to what the rest of the world was doing. What is the next image? Oh, I think this is, so this is what I just thought was interesting because I'm kind of interested in old campers.
Mm.
So this is from 1940 and look at those campers. I don't know. That, I guess that's just a bonus image there.
Yeah.
Because
So were native people using these campers?
so I believe this was the folks that were coming out helping us build these canning kitchens and these mills and such, and they must have stayed in these because I would need to do more research on this set of
Hmm.
images. I just think it's an interesting image or interesting set. Anybody can go look at them at the archives and at the state when they're up and running again. I guess I'm not sure what they're doing right now with all their building in transition right now.
Mm, mm.
Transitioning into an updated building. And this is building a root cellar in Norris in 1936. And it's just, that's a new concept, for us, because I'm not sure that we didn't really do the root cellars. And so this is like an example of us working to keep moving, to keep transitioning, to keep thriving in an ever-changing community.
So so is this a root cellar that was built on the res or?
Yes, in Norris, South Dakota, yeah.
Okay.
And this says Ted Lunderman. So this is an example of the little houses that they had all over. And I remember I asked where New Hollywood was, and I forgot because our communities have little names that change. Like right now, there's a community in Rosebud they call Marshmallow Housing, and it was because they painted all the houses pastel when they first built them. And so I'm wondering why they were calling this New Hollywood. So I remember asking, I can't remember where this is actually located on the reservation offhand. This is in 1941, but it's interesting how even our communities transition as they're built,
Mm.
Oh, and this is one of Anderson's images. And we got this one from the state archives as well. And this says it's the first car on the reservation in 1913.
Mm. On which reservation?
Ours.
Okay.
And that looks like I had his name and I forgot it already. A couple of those men I do recognize. I thought the man standing kind of looked like he might be Hollowhorn Bear. And is that a two-strike, I believe, in the driver's seat? I might be wrong. Somebody might have to correct me on that. I'm bad with names sometimes, but this is like a total classic image of transition.
Yes.
Before we go too far,
okay. And so this was just another example of transition. It's also from the state photographs where we work to learn how to do, to do the canning, to do the growing. We changed, because we are a nomadic people. We hunted, we were gatherers, we gathered wild foods, but to stay put and start trying to grow things was also our work into transitioning into, looking out for ourselves and our livelihood. And so at that time period, there was a lot of those produce shows, like they do at the state fair. And so this one was one of those. Oh,
interesting.
I see something. Somebody wants to say
yeah. I was trying to get to Annie before she
okay,
ran out of breath, or her blood drained from her hands. Annie.
Oh yeah, thank you. I just want to go briefly back to the beadwork for a minute, and I was wondering about a couple of influences that may have impacted some of the designs move away from the more tribal designs into other designs, and I'm wondering about the building of like a commercial interest and maybe through tourism as that is growing and cars are becoming more available and people are coming to South Dakota for tourism, and some of these designs look like they might be popular to some of the tourists coming out from the East Coast to visit. It might be easier and more popular in terms of the sales arena and moving art into a commercial venture through the trading posts and through the stores, especially since the collection came from a store. Possibly the intention is these were all for resale. And I think, Kelly, you need to really lean into looking into the oars design. I think it's brilliant that you connected that to the Olympics. It was so exciting at that time, and it's very possible that that is a direct link to that very exciting win of the American team. And I think was that the 36 Olympics in the rowing, but it also makes me think of, we see today, at powwow and regalia and even in sales, some really contemporary designs. It could be, the Raiders football team or SpongeBob or the latest Disney princess, some of these really popular contemporary images come into beating even today. And I think it just shows how connected tribal people were to what was going on in the greater world around them. It's, there's some isolation, but there's also demonstration of a flow of information and a flow of interest, and just how incorporating these new designs really impacts the sustainability of the work and the meaning and the value to it, and just how progressive beaters were even at that time to move beyond some of the more historic designs that had been popularized, over the last hundreds and thousands of years. So I just want to commend that collection and how exciting it is to see you have it, and some of the thoughts that you're putting into what the meaning behind it is, because we've lost the meaning since it left the store in the 30s. But I think there's still a lot there that you've really started to touch base on. Is super exciting.
One of the things that come to mind is how culture transitions, how culture moves from one place to another. And we, to me, what I find is the three major ways are war, commerce, and marriages. When people, when that's when culture changes, because they in war it's forced, when people say, okay, you're going to do it our way because we won. And then commerce, where it's like, well, you have that and we have this. What do you do with that? And interestingly enough, religion transitions a lot through trade and war and marriage as well. And that's partly rather central to our various cultures. So when events happen, like if you had like something like a sports event, then that's, that only happens when countries have or groups have reason to interact with each other already. So the transitions are already taking place. So I'm wondering, as we have looked at some of these examples, what other examples can you tell us about, even if you don't have pictures? For example, I think you mentioned when we talked before about the beef issuing stations and how that, the impact that had on culture.
I think we were visiting about the communities and the names. I can't remember, but I know from what so I'm not an expert, I'm not a historian, I'm a museum person, but I've learned things here and there over the years from different resources, from being at the university. I've had some of the greatest teachers like Albert Whitehat. But I got the question already.
No, I was looking for, like, different ways that we see cultures change or exchange, cultural exchange. People, they are doing something one way, an event happens or events happen that bring new opportunities to see different ways of doing things, different ways of thinking, approaching problems. People take that and maybe do something completely different with it. I know I've lived in cultures where people will bring something from the US. One of the class and people use it in a different way. One of the classic examples I remember is during the Bangladesh war, the missionaries thought that it was terrible that women were walking around without their breasts covered in this particular culture, and they decided to airlift some bras to them. Well, the women had never seen any bras before, so they cut them and made rice scoops out of them. So it's like, different people see the same technology in a different way and use it for something different. So I'm just wondering if you have any examples of adaptation of technology other than the beadwork. That's a good example, but I'm sure that there are other examples where Native people
Oh,
saw.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're talking about the names, like cut meat. That's where I was going with that. I understand that our one community was called Upper Cut Meat and Lower Cut Meat because the beef issuance stations was located near there. And so then the names of our communities have changed, where traditionally we don't name things after people. And I think that came in with, like the whole IRA system. So that was the other thing, but that's a tangent. But so like traditionally there's a community called Salt Camp, and that is named after a grandma who accidentally she was a blind lady, and she accidentally mixed her paints with her salt, and she went to paint the children and accidentally salted them all with instead of paints. And so they called it Salt Camp, but we didn't call the community named after that lady. So it's just, how our communities have changed over the years, how we've taken on some things and not others. Yeah, it's interesting. Other examples, like when she was mentioning about like our modern beadwork, you nowadays you see, I don't know if everybody remembers when that lady got pantsed by a buffalo. It was somebody, and oh my goodness, the community just blew up, and you saw all types of artwork with a buffalo with a pair of pants on its horn. And so I just love that about us, where it's like we'll take something new and we'll make it our own. And we've kind of always seemed to have done that.
Vicky, you had something you want to say.
I did. My grandfather was down in Lower Cut Meat, and my dad was born down there. I absolutely know nothing about it. You said something about cut meat was, could you tell me a little bit more about upper and lower cut meat, its purpose?
I guess the reason I mentioned it was that to my understanding, the reason the community was called cut meat was because that is where we were doing butchering with the issuing of the beef issuing. And I really can't tell you more about that. I would have to go research it myself. Yeah, I can't exactly tell you a lot about cut meat. I just know it's one of our communities.
It would be around 1915, maybe to 1920. 3 of the children in the family were born down there. But when I was looking at the root cellars and the wells, and I was thinking about the Germans from Russia, how they moved over here during that particular time. And a lot of those things were things that they practiced in their homeland. And what effect that would have. Bringing that with them. You have to have a root cellar. That was just a thing that the German people did. But when you had the photograph of the men that were building houses, and they had the aprons on, which are, for building, were they all Native Americans, or were there? I think that my grandfather went over to help at Cutmeat, either building or blacksmithing. But those programs stopped in like 1910. So I was just wondering if that wasn't part of the transition, having people move in. Oh, there it is. Was that Bad Nation? Was that down on the Rosebud?
Yes,
And what
these are
part?
all images from our area.
Oh, okay. Well, did you have programs going on where people, the early settlers and homesteaders, were coming over to help the Germans from Russia, and other people were coming on the reservation and teaching like blacksmithing or building with wood frames or anything?
I'm not a historian. I'm a museum curator, so I can't tell you a lot about those subjects. That's something that would probably have to be researched more. And these
Okay.
images are at the state, and the individual people aren't named in all of them.
Now, this Barclay that you mentioned had the collection. Was that the Barclay that was part of setting up all the schools? Is that the same person, or am I thinking of someone else?
Well, I think she said that, she's not really into the historian. She's a
Oh,
museum
okay.
curator. So a lot of those kind of questions really are the details that a historian would know, and she would know if a historian came by and told her. But they're not the kind of things that you're often like remembering, unless I'm taking your thunder, Kelly. Maybe you do know
Right, no,
that.
like, yeah,
Right.
yeah, I am not a historian. Yeah, I work. So in this type of situation, I would be like, I have to research that more and I can get back to you.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Well, we're actually coming up on the end of our hour. There are lots more things, I think, to explore, and I'd like to come back to this subject of transition, because it's so critical to who we are now, that we weren't always the same people that we think we are now, and that we're some part of the past, the present, and the future. And there are lots of people and lots of cultures, most of whom we have no idea, that have contributed to whoever we think we are, whether culturally or individually. Last couple of minutes, Ned, you've been there, but you haven't added much. But I know from our experience that you have lots of things you could have added. Is there anything else that you would like to say, especially about the exhibit now?
Come see it. Definitely, if you get a chance, if we're not that far off the interstate, it's definitely worth the drive down.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's a lot easier to get to than one might think,
Right, yeah.
And the museum is kind of on the main road there, not too far off the main road. It's easy to find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Lots
so
of-
the show will be up until December, and then it will go from our Art Institute back over to the Heritage Center.
Okay, great. Well, thank you both for participating with us and sharing that exhibit and giving us a chance to talk about transition. And I would encourage all of our esteemed guests to think a little bit about our transitions, the things that make us who we are, where we came from, and what kind of things encourage or inhibit our transitions. Thank you, and we'll see you next week, same time, same station.